Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Jacob Silverblade, and today we're going to be doing State of the Factions. This means that I'll be covering every single faction, what I think about each one in terms of two aspects. Those aspects are deck diversity, so what viable decks there are out there that they can play, which are significantly different from each other, which all still work. So it means that there would, for example, in a go wide deck, this is one version of a deck. Go wide deck typically puts down a lot of troops, probably early on, but not necessarily. Puts down a lot of troops down early on. Has some sort of way of being able to buff the board with minor increases in stats, to then able to lay into the opponent and probably finish them off, destroying them. That's a go wide deck in my personal opinion. That is how I think a typical go wide deck works. That is one version of variety. So if a faction could only do go wide, then they don't have a lot of deck variety and they don't have a lot of deck diversity. However, they've got that capability, but they also can go for gym boss style, where they've got a bit of healing, but a bit of aggro, but then also a constant way to be able to do continuous damage with their warlord. For example, that sort of gym boss sort of style, continuous trading damage, trading with troops, but also trading your health with your opponent's health. That is what I see as a gym boss sort of gameplay style.
Your defiance will end on the
And
steel.
that's just another example of a deck. You also have got a control where you're just trying to go for pure removal, pure like value sort of plays and stuff. You also have got aggro where you're just going all out burn. You're using all your cards as early as possible, going burn, doing damage to face, and hopefully you're able to get that last bit of life off your opponent before you run out of actual value in the cards in your hand, sort of. And then you just got tempo, which is generic. Play a troop, it does its thing, and you play another troop, and you're sort of playing a bit more of a mid-range, I guess, sort of play style. So, those are sort of like deck diversity. But then we'll also be covering another aspect, which is sort of power level of the faction as well. So we'll be taking the best decks of each faction and seeing how good in terms of this meta at the point of recording, how powerful they are as a faction, and seeing whether that it is doable. So, with that being said, we'll be covering one other thing I do need to clarify, is some factions, of course, I have a lot more experiences with than others. I'll say at the beginning of the faction of each like segment, each part, what I think that faction, whether I have plenty of experience playing with this faction, whether I don't. For example, one faction I have plenty of experience playing with is the Ultramarines. I play them maybe, I wouldn't say every single day, but I've played them quite regularly enough to be able to know probably every single individual thing and every single individual playstyle that you could possibly do with the Ultramarines that make them work. And I know every single, I confidently say that I know I've tried at least every single route into making all kinds of decks fun and exciting. However, compared to another faction like the, I'd say Necrons. Necrons, I don't have much experience playing with at all. In fact, I may have just done the sort of like training decks, you could say, and haven't played with them otherwise since. I don't have a great collection of Necrons. I don't have no cards, but I don't have a great collection. I've never really gone my way to try and collect them as a faction. So, with that being said, you might want to take things with a pinch of salt. If I have an opinion or a particular opinion about the Necrons, and it's sort of maybe power level, but I'd say you can more accurately rate that, in my opinion, even without playing the faction, just playing against them. But certainly deck diversity and stuff like that, if you got a pinch of salt, or maybe if I think one particular card is way stronger than it actually is, take what I say with a grain of salt there. Otherwise, we'll get into all the individual factions. What do I think about them? And we will be starting off with the Ultramarines because that's the first order in the list. So, the Ultramarines. What do I think about them? We'll go over the faction power level first because I think that's a bit more of an easier one. In terms of like their best deck, and unfortunately it is deck, I will say, but not decks. In terms of the best deck, it is in quite a good spot actually. It has, even though it struggles somewhat in sort of like the mid-range, it has a very powerful payoff, the Assault Doctrine card, and it's quite often has the tools necessary to deal with your opponent's stuff. If it's armor, you have Eradicators. If you need able to deal with a big thing, you got hard removal. If you need able to go wide, where you have Titus's ability, for example, you can play Titus, you can play Fire Tigurius. They're the two warders you could use. And then you have Storm Ravens along with Devastator Doctrine. Where's Devastator Doctrine? You have Devastator Doctrine as an option. It's the one which gives you blast on a unit and then blast free, and then you're able to use that to clear with the board. You have the capabilities that are able to deal with units, even if there's some things which are weaker than others in terms of actually being able to deal with the opponent's board. With that being said, though, even though in terms of faction power level, I wouldn't say, I should specify, they're not the best faction at all. In fact, if anything, that build could use a slight buff to bring them in line with some of the other factions, which I reckon is pretty good, which is the Tal and the Necrons. I think they're both in actually a pretty solid spot right now, and I'll be kind of basing every single faction around that sort of power level point, because I think they're in a good spot. So if anything, the Ultramarines could use a slight buff to get that playstyle, get that buffed into that zone. What I think Ultramarines do lack in is having viable deck diversity. So they do actually have other playstyles, which isn't just Assault Doctrine. That being that they have go wide playstyles. The Virus is pretty good with its healing ability and stuff. With, you know, they can get like impulsors, and then in theory you could go for Angels of Death. They're able to put down a whole bunch of troops, and then you got the Chaplain, Primus Chaplain, they're able to buff the board, or if you want to do that with Knights of Crag as well. So go wide playstyle is very doable. You can also go for a vehicle, a bit more late game playstyle, where you got the Primus Tech Marine, Antonio Kronos, and Battlefield Supremacy. They're able to buff up that board. To buff the vehicles and support the vehicles, and you got a lot of different vehicles. You got Storm Towers, the Predators, the Dreadnoughts. You got the Boss Executioners, like a late game finisher, and then you also have Codex playstyle, which is just the Tempos playstyle in particular. But you can focus all your troops into being Codex, and you can get, like, you know, Stone Guard sergeants and stuff, which can sort of go aggro. You know, there's all these different playstyles that you can play. In reality, every single one of them are underpowered. Every single playstyle for the Ultramarines is quite underpowered, actually, apart from one, and that is the Assault Doctrine Gym Boss-like playstyle. I say Gym Boss-like because there's some units which can keep up, but not all can at the end of the day. So you're gonna have to play just Gym Boss, and at the end of the day, this is why, in my personal opinion, this is why all we see is Lieutenant Titus and then Vara Tigurius, because they are the two warlords which support that playstyle the best. Titus with its constant healing ability, so you can survive long enough to get to that Assault Doctrine, and then Vara Tigurius with its just reliable card draw into the Assault Doctrine, so that as soon as you get the energy needed to play Assault Doctrine, you can play it. Or if you can't play on that turn for whatever reason, you can have a 1 energy ability to play it next turn anyway and still get that key crucial codex off. Ultimately, Ultramarines, I would personally say, could use some kind of buff, but it's a weird place because it kind of reminds me in the past where in the past when Ultramarines were good, and there were also times where in past Ultramarines were also bad, one of the cards which was used in every single deck, regardless of what you were doing, was Tactical Insight. That's when it was a 0 energy card. Instead of 1, it used to be 0 energy, refill 2 energy. It was a very strong card, and it just made it to every single deck, and it sort of warped the game. Not the game, probably the game when Ultramarines were good, but it did warp the faction around that one card. And I think the same sort of thing has started to happen again, but with a different card. That is being the Assault Doctrine. And so hence, it would be nice to see, if anything, a nerf to the Assault Doctrine. Maybe just one less melee attack. Maybe could use with a bit more healing instead. I don't know. But some sort of nerf to Assault Doctrine. I'm thinking less attack. But then a generic buff to everything, probably everything else, to what the Ultramarines are doing. Particularly in that mid-game / board clearing ability. And so mid-game, like a lot of 5 energy and 6 energy units are very bad. And even arguably some of the 4 energy units as well. But Apothecary Polixis, which is just below stats. It only has 5 life. It's a free 4. I mean, like, those stats belong to a 4 energy troop. And a Codex ability to heal 2 to your ward most of the time, in all reality, isn't good. Well, good enough, I should say, to compensate for what is a lack of stats. Another unit which is really lacking behind is Genestealer. The stun is nice, but the problem is it's stunning random. And it has Vanguard, but it only has 5 life with 5 attack and then 2 range attack. As I say, this is at best 4 energy stats on a 5 energy body. It's really lackluster behind. And then if you look at some things like the 6 energy drops, got like Eliminator, Sergeant, what is this? I know it's got stealth and sniper's nice, but if you really want to justify that, the snipe range attack, so the range attack has to be at least 6 so it can actually at least take out its target. Because with only 5 range attack, what is it doing? Like, seriously, what is it doing? Oh dear. Ultimately, I think none of these units are good. And that could generically use a buff. Another thing which could use a buff is just being able to board clear. It's particularly the reason why I say this is getting to the late game has always been the problem for the Ultramarines. If you get to the late game, they actually have some solid units which are very much playable. The problem is getting there. And one of the problems with getting there is that you don't actually have a way to dealing with the go wide board. For example, your Storm Raven only does 2 damage across the board, which isn't nothing, but if the opponent has a whole bunch of free life, if they buff up their board and attack afterwards, it doesn't care that you've done 2 damage to every single unit. They're just going to kill you if they're still alive. So you need to actually have some sort of board clear which actually is able to deal with the opponent's troops. And that is just a problem with just Ultramarines as a general rule, is that they don't have that board clearing capability. And this is another reason why you see Titus Abyss more, because it actually has that blast, so it can somewhat deal with a board himself just by default. So overall, the Ultramarines are in a weird place where they're not bad in terms of win rate or their one playstyle being viable, even though it could use a slight buff, in my opinion. Even that playstyle, it just needs more deck diversity, things which can actually be done, which can actually result in more interesting gameplay. So we're moving on to the Orcs. The Orcs are, I should preface, whatever the word is, I should state then that I do not have much experience playing with Orcs. I've never really used Orcs, particularly in the past. It's never really been the most enjoyable, I guess, for me, with their aggro or control sort of thing, playstyles. I've never been overly excited to play Orcs, so I've never really gone for a decent collection. I haven't really gone for playstyle, gameplay style around it. But what I will say is, with that being said though, what I will go over is first off their deck variety, and their deck variety is actually, I personally think, in a really good spot. There's lots of playstyles which are, you know, like, so you got the orc go wide playstyle, which is effective. So you got the where you summon a whole bunch of orcs, like orc boys, orcs and grots and stuff, and that's a pliable playstyle. You also got the beasts with more beast boss Morgrim, sort of a bit more of an aggro playstyle, but that's just another way to play in the game, something quite unique. You can also go for vehicle tempo as well, so you got the beast tempo and you got vehicle tempo. That is another playstyle, but I will say that could, if anything, that vehicle playstyle could use some kind of small buff. I'm not quite sure what exactly orc vehicles in particular need to be buffed, but they do have a little bit of anti-synergy with there being a lot of mob units. But if you're going for a vehicle playstyle, then you don't really have the mob to down the units to utilize the mob, and quite often they actually have high range attack in a lot of these vehicles. So you've got the Rocket Truck, Squig Buggy and the Boom Dagger Snice Wagon, but then they're all trying to buff a Death Dread which have melee attack with mob, so they have a little bit of anti-synergy in sort of that sort of sense. You also have control playstyles as well with the Widow Gorks and stuff. You also have Gym Boss and aggro playstyles as well. Gym Boss with, because you could go for a bit of sustain and stuff and just going for trading with Warlord, or you can go pure aggro and you just get every single burn card in the game, and that's also just another playable gameplay style that orcs can do. So in terms of deck variety, I think they're in a brilliant spot as it stands right now. There's multiple things they can do. The only thing I would say on that is that the control playstyle, which I did get heavily nerfed with the Grizzle Scar Boy and Widow Gork, and I do not believe they should have been nerfed. I think that was a huge mistake. Increasing it from 8 to 9, the Widow Gork and the Grizzle Scar Boy, to 6 to 5 to 6, sorry. I think you should just, should revert that. The control style wasn't particularly a problem. The only thing which got changed about the control is the squig-offs, I'd say. And in theory, you could go squig-off, and when a squig-off dies, you can go Pain Boss, resurrecting the squig-off, and that would be the control play style. That's the only other thing I would be added to it. But I think actually that's perfectly alright, because then it actually adds a win con to the control sort of gameplay style, which is they actually get a big unit, and the idea is that you get to a stage where that big unit is able to punch the opponents in the face, and I think that's quite a good idea to actually have that as a mechanic. Overall though, I think orc deck diversity, they can do lots of different things. They can do vehicle builds, they can do beast builds, they can do go wide infantry builds, they can play control, they can play aggro. All these things they can do, and a lot of them are viable. In terms of power level though, if anything, I think it's completely fair to say that two particular playstyles, but one which is more prevalent right now than anything else, is the go wide playstyle being a bit oppressive, a bit too strong. If anything, that playstyle, the best warlord to use of that, to my understanding, is Ghazghkull Thraka. And it's just because of the consistency of being able to get multiple different tied units in your hand and then go for the Green Horde. This is what I say is a particular problem, because there's in the past, there used to be the Orc Slugger Boy with tied 1, there used to be the Storm Boy, and then there was the Grot. Now you got the Grot, Snakebite Grot, Beast Snagger Boy, Orc Boy, Slugger Boy, Storm Boy, and Thump Gun Beast Snagger. All with tied, they're able to utilize with the Green Horde. So you went from 3 individual units, one of them being a Grot, being a 1NG unit, being able to utilize with the Green Horde, to now getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 different units. Go from 3 to 7. That's more than double the amount of increase. And trust me, that has increased the reliability of being able to go for a Green Horde play on curve, or maybe later down the line, but still really bloody good if you can do it then, even then, as a viable play style. Which is kind of crazy. It's that reliable, and also its weaknesses have somewhat been compensated with, for example, the Run Herd is a particular thing. One of the weaknesses of the Green Horde is that, in theory, if you wanted to get a Green Horde off, excuse me, you have the Green Horde card for 4 energy, then you have to have 4 other cards that actually play an entire board of Green Horde to maximize the utility of that Green Horde sort of play. Well, you've just used 5 cards in your hand, so in theory, if the opponent's able to deal with the Green Horde afterwards, well, you're out of cards to be able to use later in the game, or you have to spend a lot of time setting up to it just to make it viable, right? Well, with the Runt Herd, that completely changes that, so that even if they're able to somewhat deal with it, as long as you have like 3 or 4 units yet, suddenly you get all your cards back into your hand just because of this one unit, and it synergizes very, very well. So overall, those are some key things which I'd say in terms of power level, which makes this particular deck really quite aggressive with it right now. Tigreal has been doing a great job, but he is at 6,000, which is absolutely absurd in my opinion, and it kind of just demonstrates how powerful this one deck truly is, and how not alright it really is in terms of the game. So yeah, I think it certainly does need some kind of nerf. That the other deck, which I think is also very good still, is probably Mozrog Scragbag and just aggro capability. I know that got heavily nerfed in the last update, don't get me wrong, with the proper killie getting nerfed, rightfully so in my personal opinion, but I still think there's a lot of things you can do here. Power of War is still a very good card, which I haven't seen a lot of, to be frankly honest. Even the go wide builds still should be very good in go wide. But you still have that, you still have Grot on the Bomb Swig, you still have the War Bikers giving flank and stuff. Fast, I should preface. You still have that aggro capability, which I still think it's somewhat clean slept on, because in all honesty, Mozrog's still a 40 HP Warlord, which is still able to do 4 damage every single turn to the enemy Warlord's face, and still has Stomp. I think he could use a slight nerf, in all honesty, somehow, to just bring him in line, or maybe just to change altogether, because it would be nice to see some sort of buffing Warlord, and a bit of a different playstyle, because you already got Gordrang, which has a playstyle, and Boss Zagstruck, which has its own playstyle as well, and Morgrim is kind of going for beast aggro anyway. So it would be nice to see a bit of deck. It would be nice to see a bit of a change, so that even though there's a lot of deck diversity in the game, it's mostly like Grok Face Ripper does everything else, whilst all these Warlords all go aggro. And then Gazgor Fracker has control / go wide as well. It all gets played by Grok Face Ripper kind of all the time, if in doubt, sort of thing. It would be nice to see Beast Mozrog Scragbag be able to do something else which is unique and different. That being said, let's move on to the Eldar. So we've got the Eldar. We'll go over the faction power rankings. It should be stated that the Emperor's Children have recently come out, and one of their weaknesses, it appears to be, is flying vehicles. Well, not vehicles, but just flying troops in general with a high range attack. And that's because their flankers, the Emperor's Children flanking units, have a lot of melee attack, but not much range, or hardly any range attack. So if you have board and you have a flying unit as the Eldar, or any faction in fact, but Eldar do that probably best, you can really punish the Emperor's Children. Particularly Lucius, which only has one range attack himself, can really get affected by such problematic units basically. And you force Lucius to actually have to use valuable resources to actually deal with said problem, instead of just going face all the time. With that being said, overall I think Eldar are, in terms of power level, are sort of in the same place as the Ultramarines. Sort of, maybe even slightly weaker. It's a hard one to say, but the main two warlords are definitely Genestealer and Imperial Cults. Imperial Cults going for a Claim the Stars sort of build, and Genestealer sort of going for this stun, aggro sort of capability. They just sort of lack that oomph, or just maybe raw damage, I don't know, or power, or durability even. Probably that, they're able to deal with these things, and that mostly comes down to the fact that a lot of their units are in truth not very good. Some units which are good are like Shroud Runners and Striking Scorpions, and then Warp Spider. There's a lot of random units which you just never see play, like a Dire Avenger. You also never see play with a Swooping Hawk, and then the Viper as well as the vehicle is another unit you just never see play. And I can only dream of a day when War Walker will actually be even considered half decent. Dare I say. Gosh, that thing is terrible. Overall, it's not like they're in a terrible spot. They've got different play styles that you can play, which are quite a bit of fun. And that's particularly with Imperial Cults and Genestealer. Imperial Galen can go for some good go wide builds. Anything except for Blade, maybe it could use something. It's hard to say to make it particularly unique, because it's sort of just like an different aggro version of Genestealer, and Genestealer just kind of feels better, I guess, because of that stunning capability as a redundancy. Overall, I think they could just use some sort of lift to their power level, particularly with particular units, and then maybe just sort of different gameplay styles. Like there's certainly some of the Wraiths. It's hard to say about the Wraiths, but some of the Wraiths could use some sort of a buff, and particularly the anti-stealth card. This is not to do with Wraiths, but another thing is Eldar. There isn't much anti-stealth in this game, and I'd like to see the Dire Avenger Exarch be able to actually really deal with stealth units. That would be good. That's what I think about the Eldar. Middling power level could use some buff to be able to bring up to that sort of Necron tile level, and deck diversity is decent, but suddenly there does feel like sometimes they are like just certain cards in said playstyle just doesn't do what it quite feels like it meant to do. With, for example, a Wraith playstyle, some of the Wraiths could just use some buffs that are actually able to support that gameplay style. Some that go wide, buff powers to increase the attack should certainly use some sort of increase to that as well. With that being said, we're moving on to the Necrons. So we're on to the fourth faction now, which is the Necrons, and I will preface this with saying that I do not have a full Necron collection, and also I do not regularly play Necrons. In fact, it might be my least played faction with one other, which I will not get into now, but considering, take what I say maybe with a pinch of salt. Overall though, I think Necrons, let's go with power level wise. Power level wise, there is unfortunately only one Warlord which is probably being taken, and that is Imtech the Stormlord. I don't know if these other Warlords can go up to Imtech Stormlord's power. I cannot quote on that. However, from an outsider looking in, Imtech the Stormlord does seem to be the one who gets most play at Legendary Division, and so hence by default I have to presume that he's the most powerful one. With that being said, I think he's a completely... he's very, very good. I'm not saying these ones are bad at all. I think he's very, very good. However, not oppressive and not overpowered, I do not believe. I think he's got he's got a couple of builds that you can do, which is equivalent to that level of, equivalent to the best Necron deck, or if not very close. And that is like just either value play or you're going heavily on the Artifice, if I'm not mistaken. Those seem to be the two sort of builds you can go for, and they're both very effective. And because this is all from the new recent Necron buffs, and it's put them into that place where they are very fun to play and strong as well. We're talking about with the durability of the potentially Conquering Tyrant, you can do that, but more importantly, I'd say it's Immortal Pride with the cost reduction of the talent, just able to get that sustain going, and being ultimately probably the most value-based Warlord, sort of like, not value, control-based Warlord in the game. There we go. Which is very, very good. With that being said, let's get on to the deck diversity and all the different things you can do with Necrons. So, just at face value, the only thing you cannot really do, it appears anyway, like literally not possible, is go for a pure aggro style, which I'm not against. If a faction can't do a certain style, that doesn't mean that it's a bad faction, but it does mean that if its other styles need to be certainly doable, which exist. Thankfully, Necrons, as it stands right now, there's a lot of different gameplay styles which you can go for. You can go Nemesis or Zandrek going wide, which is a very viable style. Go for Orokin Scarabs, which is a completely different style, utilizing that sort of burst damage. Got Ramatek the Cruel, which is just a bit of a gym boss-ish style. That's what I'd say is the most accurate for it, with it able to just get that increased durability, increased damage from the Warlord, and then a lot of support for that. And of course, innately, Imhotep's value style, all of them can probably go some sort of Artifice style if they wanted to. Anyway, it's very good, and there's a lot of different ways to play Necrons, and I can't really point out so many cards which are complete duds. One of the things which I've probably said in other factions is that the anti-stealth isn't the best, and that goes same with the Necrons. So far, all factions' actual anti-stealth cards, the Ultramarines, the Orcs, and the Eldar, are not that very great. Orcs do get around it by having a card, it's hard removal, which also happens to deal with stealth, but isn't actually raw anti-stealth. The only anti-stealth they've recently got isn't actually that great at being an anti-stealth card. It's only really good by making the enemy Warlord gain Vanguard and then punching the enemy Warlord in the face. It's not really that great at being an anti-stealth card. And this is unfortunately the same with the Necrons. I think all anti-stealth cards should be just better. Solar Pulse, Blind Door enemies lose stealth and camouflage. I think something should be probably done to make this better. Otherwise, this is just that's more of a general game design mechanic, in my opinion, that should be done. And there's nothing really which can be said. I mean, there's certainly weaker cards, there's certainly stronger cards, don't get me wrong. Overall, I think Necrons, in terms of deck variety, is it's a pretty good place. Maybe it's just because I see Imatech all the time, but this is from outside looking in. Deck variety seems like there's a lot of ways to play, and in terms of deck power, of course, it does appear to be Imatech the Stormlord, but I think they're all pretty powerful, to be honest. Maybe they could, as I say, here it sounds Nemesis Andrek, use a small buff. It's hard to say, but I think Necrons are in a bloody good place, and it is one of the factions which I'll use as more of the standard on where a faction should be in terms of power level and fun to play and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's Necrons. So, next up we've got Chaos. And to be honest, Chaos, in terms of power level, have never really been bad. Yeah, like, multiple of their Warlords are viable. Abaddon the Spoiler, Galaron the Pious, and Xyla Hexhorn. Probably Xyla Hexhorn the most, but I don't think Abaddon the Spoiler is really that far behind Xyla. They're all very, very good.
It's for us to decide.
They do have a couple of play styles. They don't have crazy many. They've got some where they can go more aggro-centric with the Helldrake and stuff like that, Dracnian. They've also got more control-based where they go Black Crusade and with all the buff cards. And they also have the playstyle where they really buff up one unit with multiple marks of chaos and then try to get that one guy to attack in a single turn and finish off the opponent that way. Stuff like Skeins of Fate, Disgustingly Resilient, and then Demonic Frenzy. These are all cards which all do that sort of purpose of just making one big super unit. Chaos does that very well. They do, I guess, lack some gameplay styles. The fact that, I mean, this is just more of a general statement, is that they're very, very heavily, regardless of which style you go for, I guess aggro the least of all, but use some form of Dark Access mechanic. There's nothing wrong with that, but it would be nice to see some other mechanic that they could rely on and play around with, per se. I know Vulnerable was meant to be a mechanic, but that's somewhat becoming more generalist. Other factions are getting more vulnerable mechanics themselves. I know Galaron the Pious uses it a lot, don't get me wrong. But it's more of a general mechanic, just giving them vulnerable. It's just take extra damage to, you know, from sources and stuff. It's not really that crazy as a game thing, as a game state. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They do rely on that one mechanic regardless of what you're doing, and to make the faction sort of more playable. In terms of other things they can do, I guess control is not the biggest. I know they go Black Crusade, but that's more like, it's a bit different to control. It's more like late game value sort of plays, burst plays. Control, it doesn't appear to me as pure control, if that makes sense. With the no,
we cannot wait any longer.
You know, unlike Orcs, where they used to play, where they used to have double Will of Orc, double Gnome mucking about, and they would actually have to control the board, get that into the point where you're starting to look at fatigue, and then maybe eventually you can do some sort of play to win the game, right? Over time, though. Whereas Chaos are a bit different in that aspect, where they're not trying to look at that. They're looking at burst sort of power, like Black Crusade, whatever, being a bit different. Overall, though, I think all those playstyles are very durable. Maybe least of all would be, I was about to say Black Crusade, but actually maybe least of all the like sort of
without a fight.
super unit playstyle, just because it's a bit RNG-ish. You kind of go to get the cards and you get the cards, it all works. But otherwise, I think that's probably just a good thing for the game in general, that it isn't crazily powerful.
Strike from the wall.
Yeah, they're in a solid place. There's nothing which is particularly weak about many of the Chaos cards. They've got multiple good builds, multiple good cards. There's things you can interchange and stuff if one thing ends up getting nerfed or whatever. Actually in a really good state of good place as a faction, just as a whole, to play a game. So yeah. Oh, I suppose there's one thing, and the one thing is Harken Worldclaimer. I suppose Harken Worldclaimer as like a pure aggro warlord, right? There isn't actually this pure aggro. Even Xyla Hexscorn, I would argue, doesn't go pure aggro. This all goes for a bit of in between, a bit of like with Murderous Desires, a bit of combo aggro sort of thing. It's not quite pure aggro. Certainly, well, Harken Worldclaimer isn't that right now. It's actually just all in all pretty weak. So he could use some kind of buff. I'm thinking +1 attack when he, +1 melee attack with his hero power. Gains that as well, along with his blast 2 and the strike ability, so that he can actually just have a way to continuously do increased damage, and I think that would be a good thing for him. I think that would make him pretty strong. Certainly make him in line with all the other warlords, and actually make him a dedicated sort of aggro early game sort of warlord and able to compete in that sort of aspect. I think that would be a very good change. That's just a sort of like just to enable that, but overall I think Chaos faction, there isn't really much you can say which is wrong with it. Yeah, that's Chaos. So next we've got the Tyranids. Now we should start off with saying that I don't play this faction all the time. I've hardly played this faction, even though I feel like I've got a decent connection, but I've actually just missing some random things here and there. I've got like one-offs, I think. And that includes the legendaries, weirdly enough. I've got a lot of them, and it's just I've been missing random cards. So I haven't got a solid Tyranid faction yet. And since I don't play them regularly. That being said though, I think the Tyranids are, in terms of power level wise, yeah, they're one of the factions which probably could use some kind of buff. Of course, Neurothrope being their best build is decent. I have to double check here, but I believe they do have some people, one person who has reached 3,500, and their best build I reckon is Neurothrope with the Norn Emissary, but that's really just it. It's a solid deck, don't get me wrong. It's a bit RNG-ish. That could maybe just use a little bit of buff in terms of consistency. Instead, how to do that I'm not entirely sure. I guess the way to do that would be that Norn Emissary costs more, but it could decrease in cost whilst it was in your deck. So every time you trigger Synapse. And so hence when you get to Norn Emissary, it doesn't just become this RNG, oh, I played it on 5e, do you have hard removal to kill my Norn Emissary or do you not? Sort of play. And then if they do, you kind of lose as the Tyranid player. But if they don't, they just, yeah, if they don't, they just lose automatically. It's not the best place to be in, if I had to be fair and honest. In terms of that sense, overall though, it's a decent warlord, and it can do some work. It can be scary. It can do problems, and I imagine is very fun. However, if for the other gameplay styles and for the other warlords, I don't think the same thing can be said. Unfortunately, the nerf to the Swarm Lord has made it basically stop seeing play altogether. It's a difficult one though, because he was so strong before and it was constantly getting 60% win rate, so something did have to be done. I would have changed his hero power, to be honest, to probably not give +1 range attack with his 2 energy talent. That's personally what I would have done. It would have not been a massive deal, but that would have probably just taking the touch off Swarmlord, so it's not as much of a problem. And you know what, I would have seen what the results would have gone from there, you know. That being said, there is other things you can do. You can go for a Tervagon combo deck, I guess. Eventually also value, because you can just keep on making broodling Termagants, and then the Termagants can keep on splitting out. Terravangast, of course, for the Alpha Warrior, will go wide. Stealth archetype, and then you can just go big value, which is typically Neurothrope, which is typically the way that they seem to be more playing these days. Overall, I think they're in a weird place in terms of deck diversity, and I'm gonna partly say, I'll go through this in a bit more detail. This one. One of the playing styles is an aggro style, where you have a whole bunch of stealth troops, and you continuously, like, you know, either trade, but really you want to be buffing them up and potentially going face with the stealth troops and being annoying, and that's like the aggro style. So you're able to do a certain amount of damage over a quick succession sort of thing with stealth troops. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that there is no real counterplay to that. You either need like random damage like orcs, particularly random removal like orcs, or you just need proper anti-stealth tools. Now, random damage / board clears getting to the stage where they can deal with the entire board of stealth units probably isn't the best solution, because that means they can deal with other things which are not stealth units, and we don't want to be getting there. Where that's just the case. Not everything needs to be a Will of Gork at the end of the day. So, we don't really want that. So what it leads us with is to actually deal with the stealth archetype, you need proper anti-stealth. But no faction really got proper anti-stealth, apart from one where they actually have a proper anti-stealth unit, but we'll get into it. With that being said, if you look, it just forces all these stealth units on the Tyranids, if they're actually good and actually able to do the job that they're meant to, which is actually be proper aggro sort of damage burn tools, let's say, well, to be oppressive, because there's literally nothing the opponent can do about it. All they can do is at best put down Vanguard troops, and sometimes that doesn't even work, as they don't have agency in what trades into what, where the Tyranid player does. So it sort of leaves them in the place where every guild had to just nerf the stealth troops of the Tyranids over time to being not as relevant. For example, you got the Lictors, which only have 4 melee attack. You can go and see the Dark Angels one. They got 4 melee attack with 3 range attack and the gender ability to gain stealth and 2 quest points. And that got nerfed to have the same attack as this Lictor. It's not a great showing, to be honest. And then you got Death Leaper, which only has 4 life and only has 6 melee attack. You know, and then Broodlord did get nerfed in the past. His main thing, though, is to do with Synapse, actually, and how he can double the Synapse triggers, and that's why he's scary himself instead. So sort of that stealth aggro archetype, I think, could actually more accurately, strangely enough, use the only way to make it fair is if the opponent's other faction's anti-stealth tools becomes better, so they can deal with stealth properly, and then Tyranids are going to be allowed to actually have proper stealth units which can do a proper job. Until that point, that sort of aggro anti-stealth is just going to have to remain weak, because otherwise if it's any good, it's going to be oppressive. So you have that sort of gameplay, so you have that weird sort of style which it doesn't really exist, the Terravangast, the Swarmlord. So it sort of turned into this, you either go Tervagon combo, or you go Neurothrope, big value stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. I presume you can go some sort of wide board, but I haven't particularly seen it. I'd imagine, if anything, if go wide was good, it would be Terran Vardengast, just because of Terran Vardengast's ability to gain extra attack. If you do go wide. But it would be... I haven't really seen a Tyranid go wide sort of deck which has been viable. So I think you're in a bit of a weird spot. Tyranids have always been in a bit of a weird spot. Because there's always been certain things which have been actually can be quite oppressive. It's not an easy faction to, I would say, balance and get right. Stealth factions which rely on stealth and, like, I would imagine Swarm, and then also Synapse. Synapse being a particular mechanic. It's not with Synapse being able to buff 3 units instead of 1 is not an easy thing to get right. Don't get me wrong. But as it stands, you don't particularly have many gameplay styles which are viable. And it's a bit of a shame, really. You could certainly use buffs, though. How it is done, as I say, I think you give every single faction proper anti-stealth tools, and then you can increase the power level of these stealth units that Tyranid's got, so that the opponent still has agency against these Tyranid units, but the Tyranid units actually get rewarded for succeeding in their stealth mechanics and stuff like that. That is what I would like to see. So, the next faction we've got is Tal, and I've been playing Tal a little bit recently because, of course, in the last update they got quite a nice balanced buff from the balance update, and I've been really enjoying them, in fact. I won't lie, so I've only really particularly played one playstyle, which is a Shadow Sun stealth aggro sourced playstyle with stealth suits and Markalite and whatnot,
true strength.
and that's been very enjoyable, and it's been pretty successful, I'd say. But what I should get into is power level. The power level of Tal is pretty much, it's one of the factions they've got bang on right. It's a bit like the Necrons. They're in a good spot. They can do a variety of different things. There's many builds which are actually like roughly the same power level, I think, which is very much out there. I'm not quite sure if the pure battle suits are, but certainly I would say drones up there. You probably can get some Warshaper builds up there. You know, you can use all variety of all the warlords as well, which I think is very nice. All have their own strengths and weaknesses. They're a solid faction, they really are. And then the deck diversity is brilliant. You can go for pure drone builds, you can go for an infantry, so you can go drone builds with a Mesos, you can go infantry builds with Warshaper. They're both somewhat tempo pace, both going pretty wide, particularly the drone builds. You can go tall with Shadow Sun or even Onvar, where you go battle suits and you can use that dynamic offensive to give them flank and stuff. That's been very valuable. You can go for stealth aggro builds, which I've done with Shadow Sun. You can also, I reckon, do with Warshaper, and you can just go good stuff on VAR as well, utilizing that Supreme Unifier to generate extra cards to be able to annihilate your opponent with, like Storm of Fire and whatnot, typically. You can do a lot of things with Tal. I would say, is there anything? They've got a couple units here and there which doesn't see play. You know, the Skyrake gunship. You should have a video of this. It's, of course, it did get buffed. It's a terrible unit still. I don't see how this ever sees play. Until somehow if it gets flank or something, that would be absurd. It would make an absurd unit, but we don't want to see something like that. That would be, I'd say, a bit dumb. So that's not like a solution to it. So they need to think of something. Probably flying is the way forward, and maybe decrease in stats like range and health stats, but give it flying, and that would be a way forward to give the Skyrake gunship and make it good. maybe some other things. What's the Big 10 drop? I mean, many Big 10 drops can be buffed in this game, to be frankly honest. Very few are on there, but the Storm Surge could be there. I mean, like, I'm trying to stretch at, I don't know, things here. I'll be frankly honest. Every single unit feels like it has a place. Every single unit feels like they have a justification for being there. Particularly, you know, just all throughout the energy levels. Like, there's very few which really needs where you go, ah, yes, that is like, it's not like Eldar where you have a couple of units here and there where you're like, I don't really want to play that unit. No, there is definitely units in all sorts of energy values which is just absolutely worthwhile playing. And even Fire Warrior, I don't think it's the best unit, but even Fire Warrior has a purpose. I mean, it's just a high range attack with long strike. If you're able to give it flank, it is very good. And it just for 2 energy, just deal 4 damage. It has a purpose. So yeah, I think Tal right now, there's not a single thing I would dare to change. They're not oppressive, they're not overpowered, they're in a really good spot. And I don't think, as I say, I don't think there's a single thing I would dare to change to make the faction any more powerful. I think they're good. So, next faction we're going to be covering is the Sisters of Battle. I should really, there we go. We'll go over the power ranking first. I think the most powerful deck the Sisters of Battle can probably do is using Erica and Luminas, and just a generic tempo sort of value Erica Luminas deck.
In the Emperor's name,
I'm not saying it's the only one, there's a couple I'd say, but that is probably the most powerful one in the meta right now, and it's a decent deck. If anything, I would say, dare I say, that actually might be, personally I think that might be slightly, ever so slightly overtuned, and it would be only actually one particular card, which is the Sacred Rose. I think if they do get to that free faith, it's just a bit easy, you see, to get to that free faith, where you're able to get to that. Once you have that free faith, you get the bonuses of the Sacred Rose Sisters. They have to increase the attack and the increased health, and with that flank they can either be used as a removal tool, or you can get shield on these guys, have them praying, and that gives them a pretty reliable chance actually with attack that you get 2 of them, just gaining 2 more faith, which does mean that it is also a faith generator at that point. So when I say a minor nerf, I do mean just the flank ability. I don't think should be at 3 faith. I think that could be a slightly higher. I'm thinking about 4 faith, maybe. No, I don't. I think 5 would be too much. I think 4 faith would be an appropriate amount, and that would be the only nerf I would give to the sisters here. I don't think they are massively oppressive at all. I just think they're probably slightly overtuned for my liking, and that particular card can be, I guess, a bit problematic. I'm not talking about, at the end of the day, the most extreme cases. I just honestly don't think they should be able to go into relics and then next turn Sacred Rose, because then that is more, that's the Sacred Rose as a, once it's able to give the things flank, it is cheating its cost for 4 energy. It 100% is. Or they shouldn't be able to go like counter attack, gain 1 faith, prayer straight away, so you gain prayer gives you a faith, and then your guy praying, because you then what they remove is the opponent's shield, ends up getting another faith as well. I think that would be a bit too much, and then suddenly just able to go in Sacred Rose. Because of that, I think that's just, you know, far too easy to be able to achieve, if you get what I'm saying. Overall, I think in terms of deck diversity, they are quite interesting. However, they don't have the most. So most of the time, it's going with the different warlords in terms of deck diversity. For example, Junith is the go wide sort of warlord. It is the late game value sort of warlord more so as well. But it is also the warlord which probably wants to go wide the most. Morven Val is more of a mid-range warlord. I cannot call Morven Val aggro. Yes, its prayer ability does damage. Yes, its hero power increases in damage. However, you need to sort of get to that stage, and if you have to get to a stage to be able to do your aggro damage, well then that isn't pure aggro, that is mid-range. She's a mid-range warlord. Erica, as we generically said, just good value tempo sort of gameplay style, but you also with Erica, and I would also argue Junith, can go for a late game where you're going for more St. Celestine, and particularly you go double Exorcist and Triumph of St. Catherine, you go Emperor's Judgment, maybe even Paragon Warsuits, maybe even Castigator, I don't know yet, but you're going for this late game value build, and that is also another gameplay style that Sisters can do and do very well. Finally, you've got Aveline, which can just turn herself into a bit of a beat stick, and then that is more of a mid-range build. When you start turning into a beat stick, you punch the opponent's face and win. That is the game plan. Overall, they're missing, I guess maybe a bit more of an early game go wide, but maybe, I don't know, Junith goes late game go wide because it's continuous go wide and just continuous bring people back and all that stuff, so it's a bit different, but maybe there's something there. The only other thing is they're missing out a pure aggro build, and I think actually thinking about it, Sisters could have a go pure aggro build, but they don't have the cards like in existence. And what I mean is that they've got penitence, and penitence would be the aggro mechanic. However, if you count the amount of penitence units there actually are, I mean, you've got the Arco-Flagellants, you've got the Sister Repentia, you've got the, the Something Assassin, Death Cult Assassin, then you have to skip the 4, the 5, the 6, oh no, the 6 energy drop has the Penitent Engine, and then you go into Mortify. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different troops utilizing Penitence, and then a single legendary tactic. That's not a lot of penitence mechanics. There could be more penitence, particularly in the early game, with Sisters, which allow them to be more of an aggro faction, and then with that they can go along and have a whole new playstyle. So in terms of playstyle mechanics, they've got, I would say they've got multiple viable ones. I think the late game value ones, you know, all of them are viable. They're just kind of locked somewhat to their warlords, which is a bit of a downside, but not massive. But there isn't, even though there's quite a bit, there isn't like loads. So it's Sisters are in a decent place, maybe needs a slight nerf. It is ever so slight, I will preface. Otherwise, I'd say they're in a pretty good spot. So we're moving on to GSC, and yeah, this faction is completely broken. I think that's enough said. So we're going to talk about GSC for real this time, and when I start off, instead of talking about the power level first, which I have done with all the other factions, I think it'll be more appropriate with GSC that we actually talk about the deck diversity instead, as a state of a faction review, instead of their most powerful decks. And because I think I have far more of a point here than saying that they're too powerful or anything like that. Not that I actually genuinely believe that. I think they're strong, no doubt about it. I think they're pretty darn strong. Maybe they could use a slight nerf in terms of that respect, but it's very minor, if anything at all. But this is my problem with deck diversity. They have a lot of deck diversity. For example, you could, one which is doing very successful that BJ has promoted a lot recently is the Metamorph Leader deck, where you get Icon Bearer, ideally with a stealth unit on board. So like Locust already on board, you play Icon Bearer, you then generate a whole bunch of Neophyte Initiates, you then play Metamorph Leader on 6E with the Neophyte Initiates because they cost 0 now, and then you get a whole bunch of Uprising triggers, you're able to deal with the board, and the idea is you just put too much pressure on that board on that turn for your opponent to deal with. That is the point. That is the tactics here. Now, that is a very good strategy, and it certainly does work, and that's one playstyle which is very fun. Another one is Genestealer Energy with Nexus combo, and basically you play a whole bunch of stratagems with Nexus, increasing your massively attacks. You're able to do like a whole bunch of like ping damage here and there. Maybe you have enhanced musculature, Nexus himself, they're able to attack with so-and-so, and then you go something like Soul Energy to give you this, increase your Warlord's attack. With Nexus itself, you have like a 8 attack Warlord and like a 15 attack Nexus, dealing 23 damage in a single turn to the opponent's face. And the idea is you're actually going aggro here. And this would use Primus Saphriana as well as the last deck. It's the best one to use for. And you can also use Primus Saphriana to get, well, Roaming Outriders as a combo. You get 2 Roaming Outriders, you decrease all the cost of your vehicles, you stun the board, you probably remove some troops with the whole combo as well. And then that works. And if you want to go Sabotage, well, you use Scenari, right? Because Scenari gets you the snipe, and if you slay, you get Sabotage in your opponent's hand, right? You spend 2 energies, you give them a 2 energy thing, right? No, because you're gonna take damage on your Warlord unless you have snipe, in which case, well, then you probably can't kill the target anyway for 2 energy, so it's a bit expensive, and so what you have to do is you probably go for more consistency with Primus Saphriana, drawing the stratagems you actually need, and then give them the sabotages anyway, because you just use something like Cut Them Off, which gives them a whole bunch of sabotages in your hand. And yes, it doesn't draw your card anymore. What a shame, you don't care because you're Primus Saphriana and you can just draw cards anyway. You can even draw the cards you want. Or if you're going for value, well, if you're going to be going for value, you probably want to be playing Magus, right? Where you just keep on generating more and more additional troops over time, and eventually you outvalue your opponent to the way it overwhelms them, right? That's like a strategy you could do. Well, no, you're probably better off playing Primus Saphriana, because then you're able to generate the card like either the Uprising, to generate additional cards in your deck, which are all decreased in cost. Yeah. That sounds fun. You could also go for... there's a fly. Get lost. You could also go for aggro. Well, that means you're using Icon Ward, right? Because that increases your attack on your units you've got. And then you can do all that stuff, increase the healing and stuff, and heal them up. And then you increase their attack, so you're able to punch face. And you do like every single turn and stuff, and get some stealth units and so. Well, no, you're probably better off just using the Gestalt Energy... Nexus combo deck if you really want to do that with some additional stealth units.
The call of the stars.
I think I'm making my point here. It's not that you can't do additional things with GSE. You really can. There's a lot of different cool things you can do with additional GSE. Reality is, the best Warlord for every single one of them is Primus Saphriana. Like, if you go late game value, you're probably still better off with Primus Saphriana, so you're able to get the right card the right moment to deal with the early game, so you can get into the late game in the first place. If you're going for sabotage and just messing your opponent's hand, you probably just need the right cards to be able to mess your opponent's hand in the first place, which means you probably need Primus Saphriana, and the scenario just doesn't simply work. If you're going for aggro, I say Gestalt Energy, and then there's the own stuff you can do Primus Saphriana, and specifically Primus Saphriana only. Like, Magus Syrian Nas is the closest thing you can get to Primus Saphriana, and it's still nowhere near as good as Primus. So hence, when we get the deck diversity, the problem is that Primus Saphriana is so good, or so flexible in her hero power, dare I say, it makes it just boring in the fact that you just use that every single time. It's just like, you click the Warlord, which Warlord I'm going to use today. If you're playing GSC, you just click Primus Saphriana, and then you're like, right, that is the GSC button. And then you build your deck. Which, there's a lot of interesting decks, don't get me wrong. And with Primus Saphriana specifically. Now, you can't just... Here's the dilemma you've got here. You can't just buff the things, like, in the GSC deck to make it better so you can use the other Warlords. That's not how this works. It doesn't work like that. Because the problem is, you're going to be, by default, no matter what you do, you will be buffing Primus Saphriana to make that more viable. For example, you go, well, let's say you change Rogue Informant to be specifically picking out a particular troop. Let's say, choose a card from your deck. If it's a troop, give it stealth. Choose a card from your deck. Hey, choose a troop from your deck and give it stealth. Let's say it was changed to that. Well, Primus Safriana would then utilize that and go, oh, I have hardly any stratagems in my deck, and I'll specifically draw stratagems, one of them being Rogue Informant, play that so I can give an important troop that I like, because you guess what, you get to choose, and then I'll give that troop stealth, so that when I need to go along combo, I can have an extra turn of combo effects that I really want to have. That is what you do. It's still better for Primus Safriana. There's nothing you can do. If you increase ambush, well, Primus Safriana, it's just going to utilize that better. No one synergizes with ambush like directly, so you're not going to be doing that. It's a unique problem that GSC have, and there's two solutions to this, truth be told. Solution number one, you buff all the other warlords which isn't Primus Safriana, and in theory that brings them to Primus Safriana's level. This is not a solution, because, for example, if you give Mega Safrianas, let's say it gives whatever troops generated increased stats or decreased cost, it still doesn't really work. It just makes Mega Safrianas just broken. It did that in the past. It used to decrease the cost of the troop by 1, and it was just way more powerful, to the point it was a problem. And if that was added back into the game now, it would be a problem, and that wouldn't be a good thing. It would just be a Mega Surreal NAS, the GSE deck, or whatever GSE decks you can create. That wouldn't be a good thing. That is not a solution. Sonari, if you gave it +1 range attack back, but now we are going to be in the same situation. It's not as bad, because the things to support Sabotage has not so great, but it's still going to be dealing able with 3 health troops instead of 2 health troops, which is such a massive difference in this game. And it's going to be giving sabotages to their opponent, and they're not going to be taking any damage back. Whereas in the past, you would have to just take extra damage on Sonari herself to be able to deal with things. Maybe you can give a buff to Icon Ward, kind of. Well, no, it heals 1 and +1. Maybe +1/+1 lasts until the end of next turn, just because it's pure aggro, and GSC doesn't really support aggro without going combo, if that makes sense. It's weird. It's very weird. That is the first solution, and I don't think it works, because you're gonna make problems within itself, which is not going to be a good thing. There is another solution though, and that is, it's painful because he somewhat feels like you lose the identity of Primus Safriana, but it is the nerf Primus Safriana herself, and then buff up all the cards in the deck, because you can't buff up the cards in the deck to make the other warlords better. It just doesn't work. You can't buff up really the other warlords, because otherwise they become oppressive in their own way. So what you have to do is you have to nerf Primus Safriana, because everything right now, all the nerfs have collectively come together to balance around Primus Safriana, and that's not a good thing. That's fundamentally Primus Safriana being broken. So it's better to bite the bullet, nerf Primus Safriana, buff the rest of the faction, so that we can see some things like more ambush archetypes having better effects. So we can see some things like combos which exist, which wouldn't able to do before. But the reason why you couldn't do the Primus Safriana is because she would be doing them way too reliably, and that's not a good thing. We allow other combos, better statted units, that sort of thing. But until that stage comes, we can't be having Primus Safriana as it is. So yeah, it's a difficult one, don't get me wrong. I've talked on probably for a little bit the state of the faction, but it's a real shame, because basically to every single new player that I recommend playing Warpforge, which want to get into GSC because they're a complex, cool faction, I'm gonna straight up be honest with them and say, right, the first thing you need to get is Primus Safriana, and then you can do what you want. Like literally, you can then do what you want. But until then, you're gonna struggle, and I would recommend Magus and Real Nas as your best option, but you're gonna struggle. It's not the same thing. Primus Safriana is the thing. You can do so many cool things with her, don't get me wrong, and it is fun, and I'm sure it's fun because I haven't really played it, and I'm sure it's interesting because it is a lot of things, but it's not, it doesn't lead to a healthy faction, and that is my honest opinion. That is my honest opinion on State of Faction. A bit of a weird place because there's cool things with it, but there's problems with it as well. So we're on to Imperial Guard, and let's take the most powerful deck as it stands at the moment. The most powerful deck is probably an Ursula Creed deck, and you're probably going for generic aggro. You're going for Ursula Creed, you deploy with duty, you're probably getting a Rattling on turn 1, maybe you're going for a Quinn Service entry turn 1 as well, I don't know. But basically you spam the board with stuff, and you're just trying to get then troops from drawn troops, you're trying to just always stay on top of your opponent with more and more stuff than they have. And then maybe you can use some nice things like High Command later in the game if you draw into it. Whatever Valkyrie drops, whatever units you have. And you're just trying to go for that additional damage to the face and take them out. That's probably the best Imperial Guard deck. If there is, of course, the Denkler, like, where you go vehicles, I don't think that would really be the best. I think Ursula Creed is more powerful than that. You can use Hector Fenman as well instead of Ursula Creed. Yeah, they're decent decks. They're decent in power level. I don't think there's anything particularly broken with them, in my personal opinion. Yep, they seem to be just a solid faction that you can use, and which do a good job. I would dare say that right now, maybe they, with the new Emperor's Children, just because Emperor's Children do seem, because they've got a 5 energy board clear, a 7 energy board clear, and then the Helldrakes as well, they do seem to struggle until they get into the later game to actually deal with a board. So if you're able to get multiple Vanguard troops down, maybe Imperial Guard would be pretty good at the moment right now, I'm just saying. With that being said though, in terms of deck diversity, I'd say they're pretty good. Of course, Hector Femin and all the Warlords are pretty much playable, maybe except Lord Solar Leontes. You got the aggro sort of stash strategy where you put down a whole bunch of early game troops. You can also just go for a bit more mid game as well, using just a slightly more higher cost troops than stuff that works. You can also go for the late game where you go for pure big tanks, and that's when you go for energy cost reductions and whatnot. And then of course the Commissar Denkler can go along and try and get the highest cost tanks with Siege Warfare as a combo with particularly Astropath as well. But generically they're just really trying to get generic value. Commissar Denkler using more duty ability effects, because then you gives it flank and then you can use duties to away. And I think this is because Ursula Creed has more guys by summoning with the duty ability. With her duty ability, you're trying to go for more regiment based deck, because then you just have more shots to pings with from the regiment effects, which just do direct damage. Overall, I think it's a difficult one to say, because they don't seem to have particularly any other builds. There's some what I've come up with in my head with a Commissar Denkler deck, but it's untested right now, so and I don't quite have the cards to do it. Yeah, I don't quite have the cards to do it, so it's still like in the stages of, let's say, needing to be tested sort of thing. But I think they're all, overall, I think they're solid as a faction. And not the massive amount of deck diversity. You can go for late game tanks, you can go for Siege Warfare where you get more expensive tanks only, or you can go for just spamming early game infantry troops. You can sort of go for this mid in between one. I know those decks to declare it's not as good, but where you go for like Armored Lightning and then Mechanized Infantry, where you just try and spam the board as literally as much as you can. And hence is a bit of a different one, but that also works as well. There's a lot of things you do, but generically it's just generic guys with guns shooting and doing stuff.
New orders in from command.
Yes, that's the best way to put it. They've got the tools to be able to typically deal with the opponent. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with them. I don't think there's anything particularly busted about them. Have fun, guys. They're cool. So, we're on to Dark Angels now, and we have... In terms of deck diversity... Hold on, do apologize. We actually have quite a bit. Some of which are not as good as others, I'll be honest, but we'll go on to it. Basically, there is Azrael, of course, has its classic sort of teleport strategy where you play teleport on curve. That is a pretty decent deck. Probably one of the best ones, actually, although it has recently received some nerfs.
Nothing can compare to the judgment of the Emperor.
Some rightfully so, in my opinion. Some rightfully not so, in my opinion.
I will see to it.
Overall, it's still probably one of the better decks out there. Basically, you play teleport on curve and then you do things, and it's just a good value sort of tempo deck, which leads into the late game with the Deathwing Nightmaster. That's Azrael. The second way you can play Azrael is actually a board-centric deck, where you're utilizing more the Supreme Grand Master ability instead, where you're actually going for more of a sort of like Green Wing, Raven Wing build, where you're trying to utilize things like Desperate Mission. The idea is you draw a whole bunch of troops, you decrease the cost of them, and you play them down straight away. With combination of using your Supreme Grand Master as well, means that you're actually able to buff up the board whilst you're playing a whole bunch of guys at once. This is actually another deck which none of the other wars can do, and you're very much actually playing more of a go wide, board centric, deal with your opponent's stuff sort of deck. You're not using agenda as much, but you're trying to get those, maybe some of those key important cards, and then eventually later on, that's when you'll be using secrets once you've generated enough secrets from everything else. And that'll be your late game sort of win con. A different style of deck. Then we got Asmodai. Asmodai does have two variety of basically secrets decks, one which is more RNG than the other. Basically, the first deck is taking the RNG aspect of Asmodai and trying to minimize it as possible. So what you're doing is you're getting in a whole bunch of card draw like Hunt the Fallen and then Desperate Mission. And then you have a very low to curve down deck, so you end up drawing a whole bunch of cards, playing a whole bunch of cards, you're doing a whole bunch of effects, which aren't overly powerful in themselves, but you generate a lot of quest points, and then later on, if that doesn't work, then you generate a whole bunch of quest points with Asmodai generating into the secrets, so eventually you're able to continuously pump out a whole bunch of secrets in very quick succession, and overwhelm your opponents in secrets and win that way. Those are two, that is the first play style. Now you might question, how's that different from Azrael and what he's doing? Azrael specifically trying to buff the board whilst you go wide deck. It's more traditional go wide deck. Asmodai is trying to generate quest points. They do taking similar mechanics and trying to achieve two different objectives, basically. And that's how it ends up playing out. Very similar in a sense, but end up playing differently. The final thing is that Asmodai can also do is just generically play generic later game value cards, like Ezekiel, Samael, and particularly the Repulsors, which you don't normally see. And basically, if you get a secret, it's more seen as a luxury, as to use it then and there to try and fit it in with your play game, your game plan. There we go, and go into much more later game value as an Asmodai Warlord rather than anything else. The final warlord, which we should talk about, is Belial, and this is your aggro warlord. It has the very aggro ability, card draw generically, so you don't really run out of resources, and then you're able to really punch face, able to really put the hammer down with Belial dealing a whole bunch of damage, hopefully with some other aggro effects, and just putting down units that ideally your opponent can't exactly deal with and stuff like that. In terms of deck variety, they've got quite a bit, playing to their unique mechanics of secrets and teleport. I think it's a variety of playstyles. They don't have like the most. There's no like particular vehicle archetype, no particular just Ravenwing, for example. I don't think you can go with a just Ravenwing deck. There's no like particularly internal synergy. The only thing is Ravenwing Ancient, which can go Slay to buff all your vehicles. But that's unique, kind of unique within it. You know, it's not quite the same in my personal opinion, but still, overall, I think it works quite well. And there's enough deck variety to be its own unique thing. Yeah. In terms of power level, I think, if anything, they're struggling a little bit, which is first time to say for the Dark Angels. Certainly Azrael was the most powerful ward, and I think it was actually quite a bit more powerful than the other two wards, in all honesty, with all the teleport. Now that has been nerfed quite substantially, in fact that it's very much more in line, if not even weaker than the other two warlords. Well, not the other two, but probably weaker than Aeldari. Belial has always been struggling at the end of the day. So that, because of, it's not the Deathwing Nightmaster. Deathwing Nightmaster is still very much worth including in your decks, and it still does its job. It still deals with the board. It's still a big beef stick that the opponent has to really hard move what it can. It still has to be dealt with really that way, but it's more your mid-range stuff like your Deathwing Nightmaster or your Ravenwing Talonmaster or your Deathwing Champion that are nowhere near as good, can't deal with the opponent, they can't deal with your opponent's stuff as easily, that sort of thing. That's where you're seeing nerfs. So if anything, they could receive, well, what they had beforehand back, because I never personally felt like they were that strong, overly oppressive to begin with, and now that I have playtested with them, they're not great. The Deathwing Nightmaster is actually a real particular problem, so that's to certainly come back, and it will be perfectly alright. If anything, they're slightly a bit weak. If you now look at the Dark Angels faction ranking, the top one is 3,338. That actually might be the lowest in the game as a top faction, so they might have the lowest top faction win rate, 3,335. Okay, so you're the second lowest so far. I know Ultramarines are better than you. So yeah, with the second lowest win rate, the faction win rate, Dark Angels have really been hit hard. And I would argue that there's other things which could certainly use buffs as well. Certainly 5 energy slot, now that I look at it, outside of Ravenwing flanking units, I've definitely looked at all the troops and stuff, and they're really not that great. Weirdly enough, they were relying on certain mechanics to stay ahead of everyone else, and now that thing is gone, they're nowhere near as good, funnily enough. But still, I don't think they're a terrible faction. They don't need mega buffs. They're not like massively behind or anything. They're still decent. They can still do some stuff. And yeah, there's actually, when you really delve into it, there's actually a variety of playstyles that you could do. Right, so now we're going on to the Emperor's Children. And it should be stated that because the Emperor's Children are very new and have only been out for the past couple of days, maybe a week now. I can't remember exactly. It's been a little bit, but not massively. We haven't even seen, you know, we don't even have all the Emperor's Children cards yet. There's still, if I'm not mistaken, still more cards yet to come. All in all, though, the Emperor's Children cards are seem to be pretty strong. If we're talking about power level wise, the best deck definitely is to go Lucius. You're looking at more of a gym boss style, more gym boss but not pure, where you go along using your hero power to heal your warlord, which activates stimulation to deal damage to the enemy warlord most of the time, and then you just attack for free attack, going aggro. This is because you got a constant free attack. The idea is you do more damage to your opponent than you do to you, and you're forcing those sword trades, so you're forcing them to go either not attack at all, which is brilliant for you, because then you just take way less damage to them over time, or they do attack you on their range, on your range attack, in which case you I'm trying to think now. Well, they end up taking additional damage, and it just forces that aggro, and you've got the cards to support the aggro build where they don't. And that is the point of the deck. So you have some things like maybe early game stimulation units, so you can combo with, but apart from that, you've just going like aggro effects. So you're just going for the 7 energy board clear, you're going for the 5 energy board clear, you're going for those sort of troops and stuff. You're going for your hero power, and you're going for the bit of burn from the 2 energy tactics and whatnot. And it's a very effective deck. And then you have the legendary 4 energy legendary that ideally do a whole bunch of damage to face. That is the point of the deck, in my personal opinion. It's a very strong deck, and it's climbed over the past, I guess, couple of days, maybe weekish, maybe like 6 days, maybe 5 days, I think. It's some people are at 3,800 already, which is alarming, and how effective that has been. And the fact that they've quite comfortably overtaken many factions in the game as it stands already, just because suddenly when the Emperor's Children start high rolling or start getting on top, there does feel like there's virtually nothing which can stop them at that point. They've got some very powerful stuff. So with that being said, they're probably, in all honesty, going to receive a nerf when they get released, by next month. I say probably because they're so new, they might not even get nerfed next month, which is going to be a real shame, because then we have a whole month of broken Emperor's Children with potentially even more broken cards, and then like then 2 months and a bit time, then they'll get nerfed, and we have to deal with an entire month of Emperor's Children being annoying. Don't be surprised. What I will say is they do have other playstyles. So of course you got the Demon Prince, which is a demon playstyle. Hopefully there's actually going to be a couple more cards for the demons, particularly with a 5 or less, so that the 7 NG card isn't so chaotic and random. Carnivore at excess, where it deploys 3 demons cost 3 or less, because that is so swingy right now. You can either get 3 Demonettes, or you could get 3 Blissbringers. I literally had get a opponent which I was beating, and then they got triple Blissbringer, and then I lost the game because I couldn't deal with triple Blissbringer. I could only merely deal with 2 of them. Only merely 2. Oh, great. And then I lost because I still had to take melee damage against it. Still, that is a way to play. Certainly there's a lot of mechanics supporting Ecstasy, so you could go for an Ecstasy deck, sort of like a somewhat go wide-ish Ecstasy deck, because there seems to be some mechanics which support that. You know, you got the Tormentor Accessionist, which has Ecstasy 3, give +2 attack to troops, and then Lord Icon of Excess, which is Ecstasy 2, give a Dark Pact of Excess to all friendly troops. So certainly there's a sort of go wide, sort of spammy deck, but not massively. You got the Chaos Rhino, which does summon more guys, and the idea is that you can combine with Ecstasy with Eternal Servitude, where you would bring guys back, but then they automatically trigger Ecstasy, you see, and you can start to see how this combines together. The final one is probably the Stimulation. I understand Lucius does Stimulation actually really quite well, but Lord Kafal is trying to create combat elixirs. With the combat elixirs, can get some stimulation going, effects going, causing some massive headaches for the opponent. That is the whole idea, at least. All in all, I think the Emperor's Children are, if anything, too strong. Maybe they're right. I do somewhat doubt it though. We're yet to wait and see. And in all honesty, they can only get. I don't see how they get weaker. Like, I guess in theory they could be another 3 energy troop, the demon, right? They could be just like another 1 energy demon which gets released in the vault, and then it makes the cruelty thing go down. But that's only 1 card, which can potentially get worse. Where is it? It's Carnival of Excess. That's the only card which can get worse. Otherwise, Emperor's Children are gonna be as it. I can only see them getting slightly stronger from here, as it is. So there we have it. That is all the factions from Ultramarines to the Emperor's Children. I hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.